I'm Dane Rose, and I'd like to explore sanity and a few of the peripheral patterns and thoughts around sanity. Sanity equals integration. And one of the best ways to consider sanity is to think of two people who have both been attuned culturally to meet in a certain domain of consciousness that is mutually agreed to be sane. Now, this visualization is helpful in a couple of different ways, because when someone goes insane, it's not that they disappear, but they exist in a domain that the average person is not attuned to connect with. And so if they're existing over here, and everyone else is meeting in this region of consciousness over here, this person will not be able to connect with anyone. And if they're not able to connect with anyone, they don't get mirroring. And if they don't get mirroring, they don't learn to regulate. And if they don't learn to regulate, there is increased volatility, which is another form of insanity or perceived insanity, because sanity is the phenomena of two or more people converging in a specific address within the psyche, within a specific modulation or attunement pattern, often facilitated by language. And anyone who meets up in that pattern or appears to is considered normal, and then bestowed the blessing of sanity. Now, I say that with a little bit of caveat, because where people meet up normally and hang out within the psyche is not always intelligent. And so there's a distinction between being able to regulate and attune and meet in a common address within the framework of psychic consciousness and actually being intelligent. And sometimes you see someone who is insane, i.e. showing up at another address, being more intelligent than where everyone else is going. And the reason for that is simple, that there have been 10,000 cultures in human history. Many of them have disagreed wildly with one another on a variety of things, ranging from cosmological metaphors to the origin of the planet, to the purpose of life, to what is and is not handsome. I mean, you go over to Africa and it's the size of the plate in your lip that determines your level of social ranking in certain areas. And so when we look at all of that diversity through the lens of dualistic paradigm, you naturally try and ask which one of all those 10,000 cultures is right. Because this is a wonderful simplification and energy conserving mechanism that benefits the lazier aspect of our psyche, which is, as soon as we can find out which of those 10,000 cultures is right, then we don't have to think about any of the others because they're clearly wrong. And thus the supposition is, since they're wrong and we're right, it's their job to learn our way of communicating. And in the process, it's wonderful, because if everyone would just do things the way we did things, it would conserve a lot of energy for us, even if the way that we're doing things is not intelligent, using an objective measure of intelligence. Intelligence is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. Well, it's an arguable intelligence to keep pulling out the lip and expanding the plate. It's an arguable intelligence to chop the foreskin off the penis. It's an arguable intelligence to sew up vaginas and chop off clitorises with stone or knife at the age of puberty. These given traditions do not hold up in any clear pattern of intelligence where one can be ranked above another until you start getting into frameworks of specific values, and you've got to then compare, let's say 10 of the 10,000 cultures in human history. And so we consider people sane if they meet us in this area up here. And what's interesting about this diagram is this person here would be considered insane, but not if they exist in a tribe where that's the meeting point. So one of the reasons I correlate integration or integrity so strongly with sanity is we're talking about integration with the group. And it's important to understand that the individual does not just exist as an individual. They exist in relationship with the species in one form or another. And this relationship is incredibly dense. Even, you might say, here I am, it's 2 a.m, not talking to any person in particular, not talking about common frameworks, not referencing a textbook, developing ideas that one could say were mine. So where's the integration? And yet you just need to look at, the fact that, I'm sure looking at 10,000 images of men on TV has influenced the way that I've shaved this beard. So there's integration. I'm sure that if nobody had made this necklace, I wouldn't have made it. And this was manufactured over the last 100 or so years of the textile industry developing. So all those people are involved in me getting this shirt, this color for this price, and this chalk. And so we are thick with integration. But for example, if I had not had a shared currency, if I was using seashells as dollars and nobody would sell me the shirt for 20 seashells, then I wouldn't have this. And if I didn't speak English, you wouldn't be listening. And I wouldn't be speaking to you with the expectation that you'd be listening. And so there is an integration point, even in diverging ideas, where if we can track what the other person is saying and meaning, we don't consider them insane, even if we disagree with them. Though that varies to some extent around certain things such as politics, where you disintegrate and just have completely different conversations focusing on different facts, referencing different values, referencing different beliefs, and it seems like you're not having the same conversation. So some of the correlations with sanity are responsibility. Meaning, if you see something and you track it, you are able and willing to respond to it in some way. Adulthood, you can't respond without the ability to be an adult. Trauma. Certain traumas destroy the coherence of the rational framework of the mind. Certain traumas render us speechless, render us incoherent, render us so overwhelmed that we can't relate. And that ties into the fact that trauma is a flooding phenomena biologically, in which the perspective that allows us to say this is a nose, this is a nose hole, this is a nose hole, this is a mustache, that's a bit of hair, all of that gets lost when the zoom lens of trauma floods and it becomes so big, a given object becomes so big, that there's no more context, there's no more distinction. We lose all sense of time and space. And so we cannot cope, we cannot function, we cannot be sane in this state, which is why we always need help on the outside when we're in a traumatized state. Someone to give the perspective that we can't get, like the father that wants to throw themselves off of a bridge when his son commits suicide. Because in that moment, the loss is so horrifying, he doesn't want to face reality, but it's his friends stepping back a little bit further that says, well, you may want to hang on, so we're going to hold you from throwing yourself off today. If in a year or so you still want to commit suicide, then you'll have had enough perspective from the event. And so you need people around you in a traumatic situation. So what is it? And it's worth noting that in the larger sense of the possibility field and the probability field, there is no insanity. So if you think of yourself as a hard drive with all the memories and all the sensory data stored in there and all the future dreams, etc., and you're reading the hard drive, you cannot read 20 billion trillion files all at one time, because it's not just a hard drive of text, it's a hard drive of sensation, a hard drive of smell, a hard drive. I mean, we're recording reality in at least 5 dimensions, probably closer to 7 when you add in the fact that as everything is happening, we've got a thought tape recorder that's recording 60,000 thoughts a day. We've got an emotional tape recorder that's recording all the emotions. The emotions are registering biologically. We have a biological recorder. We have, all the 5 senses. We have these fusions in different ways, and stuff's always happening in the environment in each of the senses. There's always a taste, even to air. There's a taste to air, and if it changes, we notice it, and we tune it out because, we're having a conversation. And what I'm getting at is that reality is very big, and it is coherent if you stand back and look at it with enough perspective and pattern recognition. There are strong, coherent patterns. Yes, your mother said she was going to do this, and then she did the exact opposite, and then you said you were going to do this on New Year's Eve, and then you didn't even last 3 days, and it may look that things are very, very scattered. But throughout that entire time, every ocean on the planet has been rippling with the same waves of the last 100 million years. The sun has been moving around. The planet has been spinning. The Antarctic and North poles have been cold. There's a tremendous amount of integrated pattern when you step back and look at the big picture. And there's a lot of chaos. In the scattered zoom-in lens, you can't necessarily see what's going on there. It's too fast and it's zoomed in tight. When it pulls back, you see a hand. And so one of the things is, if you imagine the totality of your probability field being a compact disc, then the ego is the laser beam that's reading a certain spectrum of colors and sounds at a particular moment on that disc, because that's all the ego can process. You know, it's like this whole body is here, this whole chalkboard in conversation is here, and this whole video is here. But when you look through the lens of the ego, you can only see a little bit of it at a certain moment. And that's called the present moment. And, you know, it can be zoomed in very, very tightly. So first we see this and then this. And what happens, and the reason I talk about regulation as being so important, is when you're really zoomed in, every little thing is, you know, it either fits together in a pattern and feels very coherent, or it is completely unregulated. And so one of the problems in intergenerational abuse of all kinds is, for example, with my parents, it was not okay to have feelings in certain areas. It was not okay to have certain feelings. It was not okay to talk about feelings in many ways. And it was not okay to have feelings in certain locations. And it wasn't okay to look. Well, imagine a compact disc player being told it couldn't see the any red colors. And it couldn't go to this part of the disc. And then what it does is it sends a list of competing and bizarre programmings to the laser beam so that it's skipping all over the disc. And when the disc spins naturally and it slowly moves to the center, you get a coherent film, you get a coherent narrative, and you say, first there was this, then there was this, then these two led to this, then that led to this, and then that led to this. And of course, films chop that up a little bit because they take maybe a 10-year story and reduce it to 120 minutes, chopping out all these bits. And so you have to make the leaps. And if they do a good job, you can say, okay, I'm sure they spent a year doing this and that, but we don't need to know about that. You know, they lived and cooked roast potato for an entire year in this house, and then they moved house, and let's move to the next house. And you don't have to watch, 3,000 potatoes being cooked all the same way to get that picture. It's okay, so there's the zoom in and there's the zoom out. And then there's the coherence of the pattern. If within that, first it's 1997, then it's 1980, then it's 1998, then it's 1922, then it's this, then it's that, and nobody's pointing out the dates, and this just happens erratically because the laser beam is bumping around to subscribe to all these family rules, the pink elephants that say, okay, we're going to use your eyes clearly to come down the stairs, but then don't look at Dad doing that. Do not look there. Okay, so I'm going to look over here. And so that whole bit of reality cannot be processed because you can't talk about it. And so when you can't talk about it, you don't have language to integrate it. And so you have a fragmented map of reality where this happens and then we can't talk about this. And then this gets internalized. And you're with a partner, you're with a boyfriend, and things are going along fine. And then they get close to one of those feelings you're not allowed to talk about. And suddenly you get up and move hurriedly. And then they ask you, why did you get up and move hurriedly? We were just talking about this. And they say, don't talk to me about that. And you throw the whole family spiel at the poor guy who's just trying to see you, but that bit is taboo. It wasn't integrated, and all you remembered was something terrible would happen if anyone ever talked about that. And so it doesn't get talked about, and then it doesn't get talked about that it doesn't get talked about. And this is the way that we disintegrate someone. You take a narrative that's perfectly coherent in the spinning and symmetrical laser, and you chop it up in all kinds of ways where it can't follow the natural symmetry of the event. Certain feelings have got to be avoided at all costs. Certain truths have got to never be said. Certain things about my past, you can never know them. Certain feelings in my body, I'll be dead if I talk about them. And so how does that fit then into the present? Well, what we do is we take this nice symmetrical picture and we chop it up into all kinds of boxes. And what we're doing is we're protecting the ego that wants to stay alive from deciphering the pattern. The pattern's obvious until you lay all these mixed messages all over it. Now when a CD disc or laser or the ego has to jump from this bit over to this bit, over to this bit, over to this bit, the environment that has taboo, that has secrets, that has shame, has agendas, has trauma, the environment that contains these elements will chop the ego's perceiving ability into so many fragments with the goal of hiding the pattern from the ego. And the reason to hide the pattern from the ego is to protect the pattern. And the reason to protect the pattern is to protect someone else's ego. And this is where you get the intergenerational abuse phenomena, which a great deal of which is a form of insanity, which simply means a disintegration of large segments of the heart, mind, and body so as to conceal from the ego consciousness and from the language consciousness exactly what is going on and why it's going on, because you don't have an adult present. You have a child and an adolescent loyally copying and angrily rebelling against something that cannot be articulated. And that's just what you have. So this is an epidemic. And you can say that cultures do this on a large genocidal scale within the larger psyche, meaning every child can learn every language under the sun, but they only learn one language. Every boy can express the full range of his emotions, but in every cult, there are a certain number of emotions that are okay, and then others are not, and don't be seen with that, and this one should be amplified by 2/3, and that one should be toned down by 50%. You can kind of hint at it, that you're mildly peeved about something, but don't rage about it! Don't go into the full intensity of all of that anger, because that's not what we do in this cult. And so if you think of a child like a graphic equalizer, in which all of the dimensionality within the human probability field is regulated within the full range of intensity capable for an ego to experience, from the most intense to the most unconscious of all the feelings, all the sensations, etc. The most intense hate, the most light and unconscious hate, and you think of a child being born with that full spectrum, and then gradually, both in the womb, in the genetics, in the cultural ambience, in the language, being narrowed down to a very tiny part of that full human probability field of probably less than 1,000th of the full probability field of the species. And one of the great tensions, this is one reason they correlate genius and insanity. One of the great tensions is the tension to stay cohesive with the status quo in the group, which integrates us with the group, but separates us from our full probability field. It's one of the reasons the allure of traveling is so rich for some people, to be able to go to different levels of technological development, different levels of emotional empathy, different levels of casualness, different levels of spontaneity, different levels of laughter and smiling, different levels of body emphasis versus word emphasis, different norms around sexuality, different views around sacred and spirituality. And this instrument, that is the human psyche, can play that entire full range, except for the taboos associated with early childhood trauma, where the child is trying to, just within the tiny limitations of the thing. The little boy puts on a dress or smears some lipstick on to see what happens, and instantly the adults act as if the world has come to an end. What's going? Oh, how will this will happen? Da, 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 da. And even that tiny little bit, meaning it doesn't touch on the fact that there are 10,000 versions of makeup. It doesn't touch on the fact that there are 10,000 versions of clothing. Just within the very limited sample of this and that and the other, there are certain things. You have to be like this and you have to be like this. And when the grown-ups around communicate a life and death type of energy around these small deviations from the norm, we basically, try and appease our providers, those that provide our survival security, by saying, if it upsets you that much, I'll be the kind of boy you want me to be. If it upsets you that much, I'll cut my beard the way you all cut it. If it upsets you that much, I'll wear the clothes in the way that you all wear the clothes, and I'll wear the kinds of brands and stuff, and secretly a little red. It's not very traditional, is it? I'll do this, I'll do that, but it's like not too much, not too much. You don't have to worry. The world will not come to an end. And so you narrow it down to about 1,000th. Now, when you get the message that this is just how we do things, and it makes people comfortable, but really it's no big deal. It's quite silly, actually. And there's certainly nothing wrong with you for exploring. Then you have a lot more freedom when you travel the world and travel the history books and the mythologies, to identify with all of it and say, well, I could imagine doing that at that time and this and that and the other, and I could imagine doing this, and I could imagine praying to that God, and I could do this. And so you have a little bit more access to the full range of the psyche. But when getting back to this point where every cult has its meeting point and its regulation point, where if you show up or are capable of showing up, it's really actually capable, because if you can show up, for example, with the grace of the day, with the clothes of the day, with the language of the day, with the articulating talent of the day, with the haircut of the day, with the manners of the day, the tonal and volume of the day, and meet people there and do that consistently, and then tell them, I have another part of myself over here that I can also go to. People tend to give that a little bit of a pass. However, if you cannot meet people where they're at, and particularly if they cannot figure out the pattern, either because it's too jumbled, because you grew up in a place that didn't include you. See, this is the problem with meeting in a location that's literally less than 1,000th of our probability field, is that sometimes we have to understand we're part of a biological evolutionary system. The Earth and the biological systems of this ecology created human beings, created human consciousness. have participated in a chaotic and evolutionary relationship with this planet. And that same part of us, which is the larger circle of probability of which the ego is a small part, is constantly inviting the ego, the small cell, back into relationship with symmetry, with the larger probability field. And so you have this pendulum swing, the in-breath and the out-breath, the extreme left and the extreme right, and the extreme left and the extreme right, and the Democrats and the Republicans, and and there are these extremes. And usually the more it swings one way, because everything is medicinal in proportion. If I give you 1 aspirin with a headache, it clears the headache. If I give you 3 million aspirins with a headache, it kills you if you can even pack them into the body. If I give you a little bit of table salt, it helps with hydration and all that. If I give you a quart of salt, it kills you. And if you get no salt, it kills you. No salt, dead. Too much salt, dead. So on these graphic equalizers of reality, too much or too little of anything is toxic. There's a sweet point in the middle that is nourishing. Someone driving up all night with their ghetto blaster, 24/7 at such a volume you can't sleep and the house, shakes. It's probably toxic, at least for waking up in the morning. A pristine thing where no one can make any noise and everyone scowls at each other, just as toxic. The occasional drive-through of this type of music, the occasional exposure of something, food. I've never ate grasshoppers before. Interesting, they've got more protein. Interesting, they're more organic. Interesting, they have a crunch. Interesting, they're more sustainable. They're more wow. There's a whole science around all of this, and never did that before. But once or twice, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. It expands consciousness. It expands our sense of reality. And so we have a lot of different metrics on this graphic equalizer. And so you have the distinction and you have the gradient or the intensity setting. So intensity settings would be, overwhelm or numbness, physically, emotionally, mentally, lasting a long time or, just a second, or a millisecond, and so you've got, these, you've got the dimensions, and then you've got the intensity metric. So you've got these two variables. And in order to meet in a given place, you've got to have two people that have the address. And that's really what cults or cultures provide, is they provide a habitual attuning as a child to certain types of things so that you can find your way to that part of the psyche where most parts of the culture are hanging out. Whether they are good parts, bad parts, medicinal parts, toxic parts, intelligent parts, destructive, it doesn't matter. It's where most people are hanging out. So we have, things like the inner world and the outer world. But we also have the intensity, the vividness. We also have the duration. So we have these, at least 3 dimensions to every dimension. Because you have the inner and outer world, that's one continuum, but then how long it lasts, that's another continuum. How intense it is, that's another continuum. And then you have subdimensions like the inner world visually, the inner world auditorily, the inner world in smell, the inner world in thought, the inner world in feeling. What does it feel like? So you've got all those dimensions on the inner world level and on the outer world level for short terms and long terms. And each of these things has a setting. And we call ourselves crazy when we can't decipher the pattern of what we are and are not trying to do, and it seems like what we do with this part of our hand, gets hurt by what we do in this other part of our hand. It's like this hand is doing this hand is doing this. What's going on? And there's also, I think, an important thing to be aware of. The ego is this tiny little part. It's the lens through which we view reality. And then we have reality, which is really the probability field of our psyche, as well as the actuality of our psyche, the past experiences we've already had. But what you disown, meaning this is part of who we are, this whole sphere here, and then we're looking at one bit of that at any given moment. It's like this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this, and we're looking at one little bit of it at a given moment, but it's all there. It's all a part of us. It's why going into the past and recreating certain memories and integrating them can be so profound in certain ways. So a lot of the disease, the dis-ease that we deal with, physical and mental, emotional, is in the relationship between this lens, this small part of the ego, and the rest of the self that it is looking at and learning about. And so, and this part we're conscious of, and this part we're not conscious of. And, so when this lens gets hacked in too many ways, you can't see. I mean, if this camera lens gets smudged a little bit, or refracts a different way, it starts to distort reality. Where it's like, where's the other ear, and where's this, and where's that, and why is it breaking up this way, and why does that bit look so big and this part looks so small? But I think they're the same size, because this is a magnifying part of the lens, and this is it's been chipped like this and worked like this. How do you deal with that? So trauma is a big part of distorting the ego's lens, and trauma repair clarifies the ego lens. Crazy making, one of the things that we do, that's also there with the process of disintegration, is you cross meanings. So over here you have an object called helpless pain and suffering. Helpless pain and suffering equals the feeling of hate. If you're helpless, you're in miserable pain and suffering, and particularly if someone's doing it, you will feel hate. That's just what produces that feeling. Now, you may simultaneously also feel other things. You can feel compassion. I wonder what's going on for them. But usually if it's at a certain pain threshold, nails being pulled out, helpless to ever escape, your family being murdered, etc., it's normal. That's what the feelings are there for. They show up and say, this is a horrible thing that's going on. You should do something about it. You should respond. And so you have, a hateful reality. And then over here, you've got someone caring for the innocent and this and that. And you've got a loving reality. One of the ways to create disintegration and insanity is to mix those up. I feel aroused when someone's hurting me. I hate and despise people who are nice to me. Well, they've been crossed, haven't they? And so, confusion, and this is a normal part of abuse patterns, where it's very, very rare for an abuser to have enough integrity to tell their child or their student, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm a loser over here. I can't regulate myself over here. I have no idea what's going over here, and it terrifies me. And when I feel terrified, I like to beat you, because then I feel like I know how to do that. And at some level, seeing you scream just makes me feel centered, and I come back in my body. And I don't know why I do that either, but that seems to be what I'm dealing with, and my father did it to me, and it's absolutely miserable. It has nothing to do with you. And that's the kind of father you have, a hateful, violent, scared, disintegrated father, and it'll probably happen to you unless you do something that I didn't do, and I did this, but I didn't do this, and I don't know what's going on. It feels miserable, and that's one of the reasons I drink, and and then, of course, everyone hates me, and so I feel unlovable and miserable, and so then I try and go out and be popular with someone else who doesn't know this dark side, and, that's why I have affairs, and it's not really fun, and I don't really enjoy it all that much, but that's what I do to the best of my knowledge, and I'm ashamed of it, so I don't talk about it. You see, that's coherent. And so a boy, 6 years old, 10 years old, 14-year-old, remembering those words, would have a clear map of what to do and what not to do and what to take personally and what not to take personally. And when someone else tried to abuse them in an adult relationship, they'd say, this is abuse. I know what that's like. It's not any fun. Do you want to get some help, or shall we end this relationship? As opposed to, this is love. Don't you dare talk to your father like that. You had it better than I had. This is great. You should be so lucky. Here, focus on the fact I bought you some Nike shoes. I never got Nike shoes. Don't worry about beatings. Focus on shoes. That's the important thing in life. And it's like, and then we don't talk about any of this in Sanity. Shh, your father's coming. Shh, don't say anything. Let's live in crazy land, and so you have insanity to please the abuser, to survive the abuse, because they won't hit you as much if you go crazy like they did. And so you have this fragmented edge. So this is, leads to a couple of rules, which is that what you actively disown is, you have a neutral relationship in a healthy framework with your ego. You can remember anything you want to remember. You can learn from it all. You can experience the full range of feelings in their positive and negative intention. You can correlate them with the reality that produced them. You can express them all in language that anyone who's willing will and can follow along to. But if there's something like, I never hate, that's not me, I don't do that, well, it also means you never experienced the things that produced the feelings of hate. And that also means that physics doesn't apply to you. So there's a huge, to really maintain the belief, I never do this, or I could never kill a person, I could, no, I would never do that. I would never embezzle some money and stuff like that. No, that's horrible, that's bad, that's nothing to do with me. We have to ignore the fact that we have all the same raw materials as any other human being in history. Same bodies, same hearts, same minds, give or take a few percent. We have the same psyche. We have the same probability field, or at least possibility field. And so it's like a 3D printer. If these bits were combined in this ways and this way and this way and this way, we would become this person. And if we don't become that person, then, this, that, and the other, and we would become this person. And if we put the design like this, where we kept focusing on red and red and red and red, we'd have a lot of red here. And then if we obsessed about red being so wonderful and someone came and stole all our red, we might feel helpless and feel a lot of hatred, versus if it's just one of many colors. And so, and the more we obsess, that tends to correlate to trauma as well, because trauma stimulates the fear of the unknown. Obsession is usually the pattern of repeated behavior aimed at avoiding the overwhelm of the unknown. Someone who rocks back and forth on their chair, they're creating a focus that's helping them focus on one area in particular. And this can be a very positive, like Bill Gates used to rock back and forth on his chair a lot. He may still do it, in part of his focusing. If someone gets completely stuck in that focus, then, that bit of rapid repetition of a regular activity gets jammed all the way up and fused at 10, meaning, this was the way that I escaped the overwhelming dread of watching my mother be raped. Now, I'm locked in at a place where I don't have to think about the rape, but as soon as I stop moving, I'm going to have to feel all those feelings again, and I can't deal with them. They're absolutely overwhelming feeling. I can sense them. There is a high electrical charge running through my body. I can't deal with it. So I can't leave the state. I've got to fixate because I can't process the amount of energy that would move through me if I came out of that fixation. Well, we also tend to judge people who are fixated as being insane, as opposed to intelligently coping with energy that they have been given that they are not equipped to regulate and to digest. And on that level, that's where I'd like to suggest that you cannot 100% be insane alone. What I mean by that is that your ego lens, if it's completely integrated and regulated, goes along at a nice spiral through the full terrain of the psyche. You feel some sadness and some joy, some love and some hatred, some terror and some, grief. You have all these different parts of the cycles. You feel high emotion and low emotion, high energy and low energy, and you have some sense of your range in all of these different phases. And, every good drama, if you're watching a DVD, you don't just sit there and, I'm happy too, I'm happy too, I'm happy. 2 hours of that is monotonous. We're not engaged. And so every good drama has a microcosm of the hero's journey, going into this, something comes into the unknown. There's a threat, there's a challenge, there's, important decisions to be made and integrated, and all the feelings come up in one form or another. And this is, and it's engaging because it's speaking to all of us, as opposed to speaking, that's kind of interesting, but that doesn't touch my heart. That doesn't make my adrenaline move. It's just, there's nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't speak to that much of me because it's not a very big display of the full range of what could go on inside me. And of course, like a symphony, the ninth century, and you have this full range of, with the kettle drums, and it's that thing that moves us. It's a synonym, a metaphor for this range within the psyche, which is why music, you see, the ego is not the soul. The ego is a very tiny lens through which reality is viewed. That which is bigger than the ego, the symphony, the sense of connectedness, of transcendence that goes outside the little bubble, the rest of it, the bit that is not on this screen. You've got a little square of reality, and everything else, which is 99.999999% of all that ever is or was, is outside this little box. And it's those flows in those larger ecologies. And this is where we can say that just because you can meet another person in this shared domain does not mean you're sane in the larger sense of the world. An alien might look at every single culture on this planet and gasp at the limited range explored within the species possibility field. It's like they're all in that 2% range point. Just 2%? And some of the best parts they're scared of and don't know, and they don't teach this. And it's amazing. They are completely bonkers. We would never do that. You see, and now that we've got more than 1 billion estimated habitable, life-producing planets, it's more and more likely that not only are there 10,000 human cultures and 10,000 human languages in human history that all see the world differently, that among all the billions of planets, that life is way bigger in its concept and possibility than we, in our little lens, have the capacity to understand. That there are consciousness fields that we can't relate to because we don't have the observing and measuring devices. Starting with a paradigm, we're operating within materialist, rationalist, scientific paradigm, so we don't have the paradigm to engage with them, and we don't have the observing and measuring devices to engage with them in a sophisticated way. And so it just doesn't really exist in a lot of our modern world. What you disown fights you. If you've got an inner age, we were all 5 years old at one time, and you hate your 5-year-old, and every time your 5-year-old is scared, you say, "Go away, stop being a scaredy cat. I'm an adult, stop ruining my life." And you basically push the 5-year-old away. Eventually, the 5-year-old will hate us, and we'll have to come up with more and more clever ways to get some attention or get some of this. And so that which you disown ends up fighting you. You have a town, and you say all the black people are going to be treated poorly for one reason or another. Well, eventually they will hate you and attack you. Same with the whites or anything. They say the 70-year-olds, we don't like 70-year-olds, go away. Well, they'll get together and brood about the injustice of this, and eventually you've got a war of 70-year-olds on your hands. So that which you disown fights you. And what you are unconscious of trips you up. And so you cannot disown something just because you're unconscious about it, or you can disown it with hostility. Like, I'm having nothing to do with my neediness. My neediness comes up, I'm disgusted with it. Go away, neediness. And I want nothing to do with you. So then the neediness trips us up or attacks us. This key important moment when we need all our presence, and then we just flip over and become, completely needy, and then hate the neediness some more, and then it trips us up some more. And so there's a couple of things that I want to cover in medicine. Medicine is simply restoring the symmetry, restoring the alignment, the attunement, so as to restore grace, which restores elegance, which restores beauty, which restores truth and goodness. You have a tremendous amount when you come back to the sphere. And you start relating to the sphere in a graceful and balanced way. You give and you receive. You receive and you give. You breathe in and out. It's intelligent. You can't just keep breathing out. But if you try, you'll get more and more sick. So mapping is one thing, and that's what we're doing here. We're mapping things out. The more you map something out, the more you move in the direction of distinction and language, which leads to consciousness. And so when you create consciousness, you integrate. So complexity, articulating, tracking is a really important thing. And getting back to this thing up here, you see, this person and this person cannot meet where these two people are meeting. They're not attuned to it. They're not conscious of the distinctions. They have not been exposed consciously and through language with that terrain since their infancy, when they've forgotten it. And so they can't go here. Now this person can go here and can go here, has two locations within the psyche that they can show up. Now, if this person talks to this person about this area, they will seem crazy. If, it's an interesting thing, when Magellan came over, the natives didn't see the big ships and couldn't relate to, and blue is a relatively recent concept as a color. The Red Sea was called the Red Sea because the natives at that time couldn't comprehend the color blue. And so when, so if you try and talk about blue, or some of the natives could see the canoes coming out of the large ship, but couldn't see the ship because the ship wasn't within their paradigm. And so it's like, where are these canoes coming out of nowhere? And it took a while for them to integrate with the paradigm. And to talk about huge ships would sound insane if you can't see the big ship. Now, I want to suggest that everything is there to be seen. That nothing is more real than any other thing. That the difference is whether we're looking at a field in actuality, in probability, or in possibility. It's a real possibility, but that's very different than a real actuality. If you get muddled on those things, if you can't see the difference between an actuality and a possibility, between a probability and a possibility. If you say, oh, I can see that could be possible, but it's not probable, but you bet the farm on something that's possible but improbable, you are going to look crazy. Elon Musk is a great example of this line between sanity and insanity. And it's a great, Ashley Vance wrote a great biography of Elon, exploring things. But one of the things that differentiated Elon was that if it was important enough to him, as in becoming interplanetary, he was willing to bet hundreds of millions of dollars knowing it was improbable that he would win. He thought he had a 10% chance of winning with SpaceX. And he bet $100 or so million on a 10% chance of winning. And he almost lost. He almost failed. So it was an improbable, only 10% probable. And, of course, most people are interested in making the most money. And so it is improbable that there would be an Elon who, having just made $400 million, would be interested in making a bet that had a 90% chance of failure. So Elon is an improbable person making an improbable bet with an improbable likelihood of succeeding. So there's only one Elon in the country, so we're down to a finite improbability. Where it's possible, but there's more than 300 million Americans, one Elon Musk. So you've got a 1 in 300 million probability there. And then you've got, how probable is it that that 1 in 300 million is going to want to make a bet that has a high chance of losing, knowing that, as opposed to being in a delusional state? Well, that's also very improbable. And then what's the probability of success? About 10%. So you've got all of that improbability. All of Elon's friends tried to convince him never to start SpaceX. They went to quite some effort to show him how certain it was that he was going to fail. And he watched it all and he appreciated it. But he didn't do it to win. He did it because it was important. He didn't do it because it was probable. And so you have, and of course everyone laughed at him and thought he was an idiot and all that. But he didn't do it to look good. He did it because it was important. And, it's egg all over the faces of everyone who benefits now. I mean, our country benefits enormously because Elon Musk made 3 and now 4 improbable bets, none of them to make money. And so you have, but this doesn't integrate with the capitalist framework as much, and so we have, we have these points where something moves from probability, even seeming very low probability, into actuality. And we've got to be able to track that and have a sense of, why am I doing this? What are the odds of doing this? What are my limits? What are the odds? What am I doing? What are the limits? And so, this all relates to this arena of sanity. Tracking is important because this person can track this person and can track this person. Now, I haven't met them, but there are people, or could be people, who could track any point on this equalizer, meaning there are musicians. This equalizer with all the synthesizers and stuff can literally create hundreds of thousands of different sounds. And there are musicians who know the full range and potential of that instrument. And they know how to use it with mastery. One of the joys of Pink Floyd was the orchestral symphony. They appreciated classical music. And so, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, a 15-minute epic symphony with the insights gained from psychedelic consciousness, the insights gained from cultural consciousness, the insights gained from symphonic technique, the insights gained from rock and roll technique, digital and orchestral instruments, and playing with time in a way that broke all of the norms, creating incredibly masterful music that, again, their manager would say, don't make a music that long, it can't play on the charts, don't do this, don't do that. You can't just play instrumental, we need vocals, we need dun 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 dun. Like everyone else, come on, do a boring song. And so they're entering into that terrain, that field of possibility that is vast. So we have the ability to, if you can comprehend, if you can imagine and own that larger terrain, you can track someone else. And you can even piece together what the movie was. In other words, a good psychologist can have a client jump from point A to point 300 to point 299 to point 7 to point 800 to point 1000 to point 3 to point 5 to point this. There's no coherence in the way the client is jumping from pattern to pattern. They've got a jumbled pattern adhering to the survival protocols of their parents and culture. And yet, if they listen long enough, they will see the whole story. And the psychologist will be able to put the story back into proper sequence and perspective. Say, no, that wasn't the biggest point in the whole movie. This happened over here too. And you want to look at it in this sequence as opposed to this, so that other people can follow along with you, so that your conscious mind can visit and see the truth of the hate, the truth of the love, the truth of the abuse, the truth of the caring, that you can travel in that entire range and listen or play the movie or the DVD, the Blu-ray, in the way that it was supposed to, where one scene gracefully became into another and the transitions were nice and you have control of the volume and you can pause it if you need a pee break and you can relate to it all. Now you've got something that everyone says, oh, that's wonderful, that's so nicely said, wow, thanks for telling me, and you've got sanity again. You've got integration, you've got regulation, you've got flow, you've got freedom, you've got articulation, you've got responsibility, you've got the capacity to be an adult, and you've got, in the process of that, the cessation and the integration and transcendence of trauma. Because this integration process cannot take place without the sensation of trauma on the outer world. You can't put together a jumbled picture and break taboos and things like that when you feel your life is in danger. So what we've explored is, somewhere, maybe 50 to 70% of the terrain of insanity. In addition to the catatonic type repetition form of dis-ease and modulation, there are several others. There's the association and dissociation, continuum. And, one of the most important in our culture is the language continuum. So I know this stuff in my visual brain. That's why I decided to make a video. I know it in my visual brain, and I can see it there in about 3 seconds, but it's fuzzy. It's not integrated in my conscious mind. So by the time I get to the end of this, I see it in much more crystalline terms. So my conscious mind is better able to relate and say this a little bit clearer next time. So this has been fun. Love to hear your thoughts, impact, how it touches you in your world. And that's it for now.